Hi, everybody. This is Elenbaas from Untitled Astrology. It is Tuesday, June 11th, and I'm sitting down today to talk a little bit more about Horary Astrology. Now, I'm doing this because I have a Horary Astrology class coming up in July. I teach this class usually every year and a half to 2 years. It's kind of one of the rarer offerings, I guess, that I put out there. And the reason for this is that it's kind of this exotic topic that a lot of people who are interested in astrology, A, you have to be a little bit more advanced to study it, and B, it's complicated. It takes a long time to get good at, and sometimes it's a very overwhelming thing for people to study. But in my experience, it's also completely beautiful, very interesting, very compelling, and when you see it working, it's very compelling. It just has this way of grabbing you. To me, every horary chart is sort of like a puzzle that you're putting together that requires you to look at the heavens and see how they are depicting the inner workings of a very specific situation that someone is inquiring about. Every situation is different. So I'm going to show you another chart today, another horary chart that'll be kind of fun. As another will I get the job chart, I showed you one in the first video I did on the magic of horary, and this one's kind of following up. So a person asks the question, will I get the job? I cast the chart at the time I receive the question from my location because I'm the diviner, so to speak. So I'm the astrologer, right? So I'm going to read the chart from my location. Now, I mentioned this in the first video. Some people commented. I have studied for quite some time with John Frawley, and also have taken a lot of my work from the teachings of William Lilly. Those are kind of two main teachers. Jeffrey Cornelius has also been really important to me, and Christopher King, one of my first astrology teachers, and also someone that wrote a book, I guess, when horary was becoming rediscovered, being rediscovered in the 1980s. There was a guy his name was Derek Appleby, and he had this nice little horary textbook that I really liked. There's a lot of different places that have become Deborah Holding, and I've taken one of her classes. And so a lot of different horary streams, a lot of different voices, and a lot of different techniques and methods out there. Not all of them agree with one another. So I say that because, inevitably when you start posting horary, the technique trolls come out. And the technique trolls are people who will say, well, you should have done this, or I would have done that, or whatever, So this video is really meant for people who have not done horary before, who are more new to it. And the class that I teach is also basic in the sense that it's not a lot of advanced, hyper-technical debates, about horary. It's more about, a standard basic way of doing things that I've learned in a variety of different kinds of readings. But it's also, the class is really fun because we take live horary charts year round from people on the internet and read them together in the class. You're always surprised actually by what you get. Anyway, so in this chart, will I get a job offer this year? Client is given to the ascending, the ruler of the ascendant, that's Venus, and client would sometimes get the moon as a co-significator. But in this case, the 10th place, which is the place of career, is ruled by the moon. And so we have the moon as the job. That's the planet that's going to play the part of the job in this chart. And then we have Venus, which is the client's significator. Now, Venus in Taurus exalts the moon. It's in the exaltation of the moon in the way that my teacher taught me to work with dignities. The reception here would kind of tell you this person has a lot of hopes and may be thinking a lot about this job. Their signifier Venus is in the exaltation of the job. So they're sort of, there's this exalted way of thinking about or dwelling upon this job. Now, here's what happens. They might be thinking about a specific job. They did not tell me, but there could be a specific job that they have in mind. We look at the moon because the moon is the job, and we look at Venus and we say, are they coming together by any kind of aspect? And here, indeed, we see the moon moving into an almost immediate square with Venus. And of course, Venus is exalting the moon, so this would lead us to believe that a job offer will indeed come and that the client will exalt this job offer, probably leading to them taking it. Now, a square is not the most easy aspect, so there may be some challenges involved, but generally speaking, any aspect will do except for an opposition. Just very basic stuff here. So there's an aspect between the job and the person. So yes, we'll get a job offer. When will it come? Well, you can gauge the distance away that the two signifiers have from each other and the one that's applying to the other. So the moon is applying to Venus within about a degree, a little over a degree. And so you could say that sometime between 1 and 2 units of time. 1 and 2 units of time could be short, like hours, minutes, days, or it could be longer, like weeks, months, or years. So this in fixed houses, or excuse me, in succedent houses and in fixed signs, you kind of weigh that together. And in this case, since the client is asking within a year and the aspect is very imminent, I would say within a month or maybe just over a year from now, that you'll find a job. But I do think a job is coming, and I think this horary is telling us to, basically not to worry. However, here's the interesting thing. What's going to happen to these signifiers after they connect? Well, the moon is going straight into Virgo, which will then, the moon will then be in the fall of Venus. Virgo is the fall of Venus. And Venus will then enter Gemini, where Venus will no longer have any high regard for the moon as it does now in the moon's exaltation in Taurus. So what does this mean? Right now, querent, sort of worships, maybe even idolizes the job or a job, but shortly after will have no longer the strong feelings for the job. Whereas the job, which currently doesn't do anything good or bad for the querent in Leo, has no positive or negative major reception or connection with Venus, will go into Virgo, where it will be in the fall of Venus. So that tells us that while this person may get a job, they may not like it soon after, or it may not prove to be very good for them in the long run, or that the job may not, you could say kind of abstractly, the job may not like the person even so much, or that there may be just some level of disagreement between the individual and the job. So that's what comes out of the situation right afterwards, and that's worth noticing in this case because the signifiers are at the very last degrees of the signs, and their dignity and their relationship with each other is about to change in terms of sort of how they perceive each other. So that's what I reported to this individual. Yes, you'll get a job either maybe a little over a month or maybe just a little over a year from now. Those are my best guesses, but I will always say within a unit or a little over a unit of time in this case. And I think that after you get the job, though you might be kind of really liking it at first or very excited about it, it may let you down, or it may be more stressful than you think it will be. So that's kind of how this works. And this individual gave me permission to share their chart in a YouTube demonstration. So in class every week, lots of different kinds of questions come in, lots and lots of different questions. I'm going to show you one more. So this is a question that we did in a class of mine a couple of years ago. And let's just make sure I've got it. So this was, will Clinton win the election? And this was right before the Clinton-Trump election. Now, this is a really interesting case of one that I got wrong, and I want to show you why I got it wrong. And this is, again, just according to the particular methods and practices that I use in my own practice. So first of all, we identify in a contest, if you have someone that you favor, you'll often give them the ascendant. So Hillary got the ascendant because I was favoring Hillary. Sorry for all of you out there who may not agree with me. And then the opponent would be Venus, the 7th house ruler, which would be Trump. Now, this does not mean that Trump is like Venus and that Hillary is like Mars. These are just the actors assigned to play the roles of these people. So then I noticed a couple of things. One thing is that when you're enemy or opponent signifier is in your house, it can mean that they have an upper hand, that they're dominating you somehow. That's a possibility. So saw that, and I thought, oh, that's not good. Plus, a malefic, a malefic in Hilary's house. That doesn't seem good either. And that kind of drew my attention right away. But in a chart where it's an election contest, we look at the moon as the population, as the voters, as the city. The moon represents the voters. And here I noticed that the moon is in the fall of Venus, which is Trump. And you'll notice that the moon is going right into a trine with Hillary. And the moon doesn't have any essential favoring of Mars that's major, but it really debilitates Venus. So when I looked at that, I thought, oh, well, Hillary wins the vote. So Hillary is elected. But you can win the vote in our country and not be elected because of the Electoral College. Now, I still am not entirely sure what this next part means, but how might I have seen that Trump was going to win and not Hillary? Well, here's a pretty big hint. Venus is moving at 10:00 into a sextile with Jupiter at 10:04. And Venus is in Jupiter's sign of Sagittarius, and Jupiter is in Venus's sign of Libra, which means they're in what's called a mutual reception. This is happening with Jupiter right on the very cusp of the 11th house, which would be the house of friends or colleagues or allies. Now, when I read this chart, and I talked to my class about it, and I also talked to my wife about it before I kind of ended up judging the chart. I don't think I published this live anywhere, and I said to my wife, I said, it looks like Hillary's going to win. The vote seems to really be, the voters seem to really damage Trump and seem to be, moving into the smooth trine with Hillary's significators, even though there's not major reception. So I think she's going to win the vote. And I, not thinking about the Electoral College, not catching that detail, that there's a difference between the popular vote and the Electoral College, I said the only way would be if somehow Trump had some friends, and this is just me talking, excuse me if you're a Republican, but I was like, so he has some Republican henchmen out there who are going to somehow help him. I said that to my wife, probably just a few days after I cast this chart and was still looking at it. And so you see this mutual reception with Jupiter right on the cusp of the house of allies. And I thought, something about that Jupiter, there's a mutual exchange going on between Venus and Jupiter in this chart. What would that exchange be about? It seems overwhelmingly positive. And given the other signature of, his significator, Venus, being in her house, which in contest horaries may mean that they're exerting a dominance over their opponent, with a malefic in Hillary's house too, I was like, something about this doesn't feel right to me. It's almost like he's going to have, and I said, I wonder if they'll rig the voting boxes or something. I was joking about it because I really didn't think it was possible. So I ended up judging that I think Hillary would win because I just didn't know what to make of this other thing. And so whether that mutual reception is the Electoral College, or whether we think of it as some help that he received from the Russians interfering, or whatever else, it was something that I missed, and in this case got it wrong. But I was right that he won the vote. So this was a really interesting horary, and one that I learned a lot from, that I thought you might also be interested in seeing. All right, so that gives you a few more things to think about with regard to horary. So what does it do for you to study horary astrology, whether you study it with me in my upcoming class or you study it on your own? And I'm going to give you some good books to think about today in terms of starting to study horary on your own if you want to. First of all, if you study traditional or classical natal astrology, adding horary into your toolkit makes you a better predictive astrologer. All of the moves that you learn to make in horary can be applied somewhat intuitively in natal readings and in transit and forecasting work. And it sharpens your ability to see the particulars rather than thinking in big general terms. So for example, in modern astrology, we often think about Pluto, Uranus, Neptune, and we think about these big seasons of transformation that are deeply psychological and sort of spiritual in nature. And we forget to look at the faster moving planets and their connections within, say, the week or the month, and get a picture of what specifically might be happening. And horary teaches you how to see things in a narrower time frame most of the time, in a very specific context. And it helps you to become a little bit more 3D and a little bit more concrete and objective in predicting planetary movements and everyday things. For example, sometimes you'll go to a tarot reader, and I had this experience a lot when I lived in New York City. You go to a tarot reader who specializes in, say, like I'm a spiritual tarot reader, something like that. I use angel cards and all this. And basically you get transformation. You're going to change. You're going to grow. It's going to be like this. It's going to be like that. And I would go, on the other hand, when I set up shop for the first time, when I set up my astrology school for the first time, it was in Manhattan, in Chelsea. And right across the street from where I set up my school was like a psychic shop, like, the neon lights, with a crystal ball type of situation in the glass window out front with red velvet curtains, like the whole thing. And having a reading in several of those type of locations in New York City, and seeing like old school diviners, old school fortune tellers sit down with the cards and they were able to be very specific about things that were happening very immediately around me, about people, about things, about money, about business deals, about, we're lacking that ability in modern astrology, for as advanced as we are in the sort of the broad psychological movements of our lives, the psyche and its behavioral patterns. Those are things that we're really, modern astrology gives us a lot of good tools for that, but horary gives us that very specific picture of, where things are happening right now, kind of in the moment. Now, I'm going to see if I can find one more that I'm going to show you. This one is called Where. Nope, hold on. I thought I had it. There we go. Yeah, this one is called Where is the Missing Bull? So I'm going to show you just briefly. This one gets a little technical, so I'm going to try to keep this simple. But I helped locate a missing bull that one of my students, who is a farmer, was dealing with. She called, sent me a message and said, our bull is gone. We don't know where our bull went. And can you do a horary to find him? So this is a chart where the question was, where is the missing bull? Now, I'm going to give you just some of the details that are really interesting. So an animal the size of a bull, and I'm not going to go into why, but an animal the size of a bull is going to be located based on we're going to identify it as the 12th house ruler. So animals of that size are located by the 12th house ruler, which gives us the bull as Mercury. Now, Mercury in this chart, actually, let me do this again. Mercury in this chart is sitting right on the cusp of the 6th place, the 6th house, right on an entryway to a house, right? It's in a fire sign, and it is, in this case, what you can't see is that if you use your ephemeris, or in this case, just use the tracking of the software, Mercury had just turned direct and is barely moving direct. So in other words, it had just stationed and stopped and wasn't moving, and now it's moving direct, but barely. So what does that mean when the bull is sitting on the entryway to a house that's associated with accidents and injuries and illness? It's sitting right at the edge of a gateway to a house, and it's barely moving. It had been moving backward and then stopped and didn't move at all, and now it's barely moving forward. So I took that and I said, using some directional analysis, I said I would check a structure somewhere. I don't remember which direction it was at this point. This was a couple of years ago. I think it was this, what was it? I can't remember. I can't remember, but it was like the Southwest or something like that. I do not have my directional there's a whole way of analyzing the direction that something might be located in, and I don't have that memorized offhand. I should have brought some of my notes down. But so at any rate, the bull, I said, would be maybe in a field to the southwest, and at the entryway of a structure. Maybe it got backed into something and got stuck, maybe near the entryway to something, a gate or a building or a structure. Maybe someplace, where it was going to be warm, fire sign, warmth, you think of that, or a fire sign also associated at some level with buildings and walls. There's a reason for that too. But, and maybe it got stuck and is now free, but wounded or injured. You see Mercury, the bull, is in its detriment in the sign of Sagittarius, which also might mean that the bull is damaged or harmed or wounded in some way. Plus it's on the 6th house cusp of accidents and injuries. So maybe the bull is a little hurt, and so forth. So that was the gist of it. So indeed, they found the bull. A neighboring herd had backed the bull into this little red barn, and it had backed into a stall that was too small for it and gotten stuck, and then had come out of the stall and cut up its sides pretty good getting back out, and was sitting not far outside of the door, and probably somewhat intimidated by this neighboring herd. And I don't remember the details, but somehow this neighboring herd, and I don't know, another bull or something had strayed off their property, gone through a fence that had been open somehow, then gone into this neighboring pasture, and then been backed into this place. And when they found it, its sides were all cut up, and it had from the way that what they were able to deduce was that it had been pushed back into this little barn. So at any rate, that was an amazing horary. Now, why is that valuable to us? Like, what is so valuable about that? Well, again, like for me, it does a few things to your practice as an astrologer. One, it makes you sharper when it comes to your ability to read symbols, transits, if you're doing daily forecasting, if you're writing horoscopes, your ability to see specific stories, and your ability to also use astrology retroactively. So you have something happen in your day, and you see where the planets were at, and you can match up the planetary movements, the things that are happening. That kind of hindsight is really helpful, and it's also helpful when you go to do predictions. You just get a more up to the minute horary of the hour, a practice, the word horary of the hour. You get a practice that is more about the specifics. Now, here's what that does to us as well. In modern psychological astrology, we like to think of process. So we are beings in process. I'm always growing. I'm always healing. I'm always developing. I'm on a journey, right? These kinds of words, this kind of language is so frequent that people don't recognize how dissociating it can be. It's not saying it's always that way, but it's so frequently dissociative. It takes us away from the facts around us. There's a squirrel, right? Like right outside of my window crawling across the roof. When we're in process all the time, we're always in the movement of going towards something, but never really arriving. And I'm someone who, I value process-oriented paradigms psychologically and spiritually. I think we are beings in process. We are, in some sense, evolving, right? But astrology is also something that is meant to give dignity to the bull. It's meant to give dignity to the squirrel. It's meant a planet can represent, a pitchfork or a hay wagon or a wheelbarrow. One of the things that came about during the modernist movement in poetry was, I think it was William Carlos Williams who wrote this, some kind of imagistic poetry. It's really short, almost like a Zen koan or like almost like even like a limerick or something, where there's or what's the other word I'm thinking of? A haiku. That's the word. Not a limerick, a haiku. Just a few sentences describing the vividness of some experience, like the wheelbarrow, the famous red wheelbarrow poem by I think it was William Carlos Williams or Ezra Pound. It was one of the two. I can't remember. But at any rate, horary is like that. Horary is trying to bring us into the immediacy of planetary symbolism. It's not. Some people in modern astrology have tried to do away with fortune telling. Oh, fortune telling, it's so bad. We're process-oriented beings. Yeah, but it's also really helpful to take these symbols down to earth and not bypass the birds and the flowers and, the everyday things that happen, like, nicking your car, by running over a nail and having to replace a tire. Do you know what I mean? That world is actually just as infinite and interesting and deep as is the world of process-oriented experiences that are happening over years of our lives. Well, I used to be like this, and now I'm like this. I grew over 10 years. But we don't live in 10-year spans. Do you know what I mean? And so I think my favorite thing about horary is the way that it brings us into the immediacy of planetary experience. So many horary charts help you to see Mercury, as a pen. Do you know what I mean? And it helps you to see, Venus as the beautiful scent that you smell when you're on a walk, just as the moon is moving through an opposition with Venus or something. So I hope that I've made a good case for that horary is something that sanctifies. The planets are not just our process. The planet is the bull. The planet is the backward walking bull cutting up its flanks. You know what I mean? The planets are, I helped a woman the other day determine whether or not an object had been stolen. I help people determine whether or not they'll get the job. These kinds of things are the daily folk practice of divination. So people call it's really quite degrading to call it fortune telling, because there's a huge history of diviners who help people with very, very basic things like, will my crops turn out okay? Or, is my husband dealing with a very serious sickness, or will it get better? If we lose that side of I'm just going to go ahead and call it the fortune telling side of astrology. I really think we're missing something that sanctifies all of the everyday stuff. So that's my philosophical and spiritual reason for loving horary. And it also is just such a pleasure for the brain, to be like, when I realized, my God, the station of Mercury and its direct movement at the gateway of this house, and you start to see a picture, that's just so magical. And it teaches you to be a better astrologer. So I hope that I have convinced you to try studying horary. I'm going to give you 2 books. These are actually 3 books. So this is the timeless classic of horary called Christian Astrology. And it's not about Christianity at all. This is, the name has to do with kind of the historic moment that Lily was living in, and there's a whole story around that. There's another really wonderful book called William Lilly, The Last Magician by Sue Ward, I think wrote it. It's on my shelf over there. I just can't see. She co-authored it with someone else, Peter something, I think. Yeah. So that's if you want to read more about him. But Christian astrology, if you read through this, you'll it's such a delightful read. You have to have a little patience because it's got that kind of old English feel. This is my teacher's horary textbook, the Horary Textbook Revised Edition by John Frawley. I think he's a very masterful horary astrologer. One of the things that should move you about a horary teacher is that you like the way that they solve charts and you see them using consistent methodology, and they have a successful horary practice, and you can kind of entrain yourself to their methods. That's because there's also a lot of debate out there about different methodologies, and that can be overwhelming for beginners. This is another great horary examples, traditional horary astrology by example. This was put together by a group of astrologers and John Frawley's students, if I remember correctly. And this is good to pair with the horary textbook. Those are some good places to get started. There's also one called Horary Astrology by Derek Appleby, and that's a good one. If you want to read more about the philosophical basis of astrology, I highly recommend The Moment of Astrology. And I'll pull that one out too so you can see it. This is The Moment of Astrology by Jeffrey Cornelius, Origins and Divination. It's basically making the case that, let's not be too quick to say, no, astrology is not fortune telling. No, astrology is fortune telling. It has that power. It always has. And even if it becomes a tool for psychological growth and development, it does have the power to read the future. So at any rate, that's what I've got for you today. I hope that you're interested in horary. And my course starts on July 10th. Early bird rate is in effect now all the way until July 1st. It's $1,200 for the year. There are 24 classes, plus you get access to my seasonal speaker series, which is 12 more guest lectures. So a lot of good stuff. We do a lot of work together in class on horary. The only thing you need to know to join is you need to know already about the meanings of the houses, basic meanings of the signs and planets. You need to know how to spot aspects, and you need to know your essential dignities. I suggest people, if they don't know those things, to start with my year 1 course, which just started. Not too late to join if you want to join that. You're welcome to dive into this class and try the best you can to catch up, but I don't take time to go backward for people. We assume a certain level of knowledge and just move forward. Maybe I'll see some of you there. Otherwise, I hope I've gotten you interested in horary. I hope you guys also have a great rest of your week. Take care. Bye.